Good evening. Welcome to AIQRATE Webinar Specials CXO series. Today we have Bala Girisaballa, entrepreneur and author with us to discuss on the topic Reset Growth and Scale Models for Startups, Strategic Perspectives. This session will be moderated by Dhanrajani, CEO and co-founder, AIQRATE Advisory and Consulting. Before the session, some housekeeping rules. Request all to be on mute throughout the webinar. Leave your questions in the chat window and we will take them up for Q&A. This webinar is being recorded and you can check the playback video on our website www.aiqrate.ai. Now I would like to introduce Bala. Bala Girisaballa has over 2.5 decades of global experience in technology and business. An entrepreneur and an author himself, he has founded 3 startups and is an advisor to many startups and venture funds for over 10 years. He has also contributed to many books. Until recently, Bala was the president of Techstars India, the world's leading platform for startups and innovation. Prior to that, Bala was the managing director at Microsoft Accelerator India, Microsoft's flagship startup program. His previous experiences include leading innovation at Yahoo, enterprise products at Oracle, and a partner in a global management consulting and research firm. Bala, pleasure to have you in our CXO series webinar specials today. Thanks for making time. I'll now hand over the session to Samir. Samir, session is yours now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, NK.
Thank you.
Thanks, NK, for the introductions. And Bala, first of all, pleasure to have you at the CXO series.
Thank you.
Must admit, the profile per se doesn't do justice to your what I call multifarious kind of, let's say, dimensional aspect of your professional spheres. Because one, I know you in person and the kind of, let's say, various facets over the years, what you have worked upon on the startups, accelerators, incubators, corporates, GCCs, and the whole ecosystem per se, also with the industry consortia, is commendable. And expect this session to be a cracker because this is the first time in our, I would say, 40th, we are doing this 40th session. This is the first time ever we've got someone who's revered name in the startup and the VC ecosystem. So would love to pick up your insights, Bala.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me over, Samir. I think it's fantastic to chat with you.
Pleasure. And I think just to get the ball rolling, Bala, and I think this is one aspect which we haven't covered, which is in the past also. While we've talked about this whole COVID situation impacting everyone, corporates, GCC, I mean, the whole enterprises, the whole even aspect of leadership, HR, even exponential technologies. What's the thing in terms of the winds of change you're seeing from a startup ecosystem side? Because that's been, if I just take a bit of pullback, there was a story which was resonating well from an India point of view, a lot of exponential technologies-led startup, a lot of kind of areas where the new problem-solving things were getting done by the startup. And suddenly there is a break, there is a pause, but you have that lens which from where you see a lot of these things in terms of how it's evolving or there are challenges. Would love to take some of your insights to begin with, Bala.
Sure. No, you are absolutely right in terms of characterizing a current situation and its impact. I would reckon the current situation actually not as an event in time, but more it's still playing out. The crisis is still not over. In my opinion, I think the closest it comes to is probably not even the 2008 financial crisis. It would come to probably a prolonged crisis, which is probably I would even hazard a guess of World War II, right? So it's somewhere because it prolonged for about 4 or 5 years, and it's a long time, and you would never know when the crisis is actually getting over. So at least in 2008, you knew there was 1 or 2 years, and then Then next was you have to deal with the fallout of the event. Right now, we are living in the crisis still, right? And with hey, I just got a pop-up that they couldn't hear. Can people hear? Can we do a sound check on,
Looks okay. NK,
Okay,
we are
okay.
good.
Looks okay, Bala.
Looks okay.
Looks like
Yeah, okay. I'll just continue then. Yeah, so I think it's a little bit different from that angle. If we have to, draw parallel, we'll have to draw parallel to, I think, Second World War and everything. And so what this also means is, because the crisis is prolonging, continues to prolong, there are issues that are very unique to this as compared to a particular event in time kind of a situation that happened in 2008. And which is that, like, a lot of people will not have a clarity of, hey, whether the crisis is over, when is the crisis going to be over, and how will the fallout look like. And so we are living through the crisis, which creates huge amount of issues from startups, because most of the startups are not well capitalized. Many of the startups are in very different stages of journey. Some of them are lucky that they were able to raise some money before the COVID happened, but many of them were not, right? So, and they typically do not have visibility of their markets as well as their financial situation for 6 months or 9 months ahead of them. So it really puts them through a lot of stress, and that's certainly still unfolding. And there is still kind of, we have to see how the fallout will look like. In my opinion, I think we need to kind of look at it from multiple lenses. Number one, how do we respond? How do startups respond during this period, this ongoing crisis period? How do we prepare ourselves, and what should we do? That's one thing that they need to worry about. And the second is, once this is over, your world has permanently altered. It is not going to go back to when things go to normal. It's not the same normal, and we all are familiar with this term of new normal. But that's definitely, I would call it as permanent alteration of the markets across the board. And what would that look like? And their value proposition pre-COVID, will it resonate in the same manner with their markets in post-COVID? That's a big question that startups have to deal with. So in their minds, they're dealing with, how do I get through this current situation? We don't know how long it lasts. Number two, when it ends, what will the world look like, and will I still have the market and the opportunity that we talked about? So this is where I'll just pause here to see, if you want me to elaborate more on this, I will, but I'll just pause here. These are the two big questions that startups are kind of, wrestling with.
So this is a good beginning, Bala, and this is where I would like you to kind of just peel it out. So you mentioned the new normal. I call it the new next, because things may not be the same as we come out of this crisis, and maybe the rightful word, the right word, what you said, prolonged crisis kind of a thing. Now, startups have different maturity aspects. Seed ones kind of a thing, early stage, then they go through a midlife kind of a thing, and then there is evolved startups. Now, when we're talking about this new next scenario, let's say 6 months, 1 year down the line, how does this whole aspect about some of these strategic model changes they would go through, operating rhythm, this whole aspect, how they manage, sell, kind of a thing? Because purely today, the way they used to kind of really sell or kind of operate in terms of grabbing or kind of doing acquisition of clients looks like it will have the same kind of let's say, regime in terms of what they were used to. So help us in terms of throwing some light. Take maybe a few of the startups at different stages, generically, if you want to name, that's your call. But how does this whole thing evolve, let's say 6 months, 1 year from now, from strategic model, kind of operating rhythm, to maybe even in terms of how they do the client acquisition?
Got it.
I know it's a late question, but I think that's where we would be able to pick up your insights, actually.
Sure, absolutely. And I think let's look at that. And I think the first thing I tell startups, I do, many of them reach out to me and say, hey, help me unpack how we should prepare. We'll talk about what they need to do today, separately. But right now, your question is, how do you prepare myself for post-COVID? And that answer is, in my opinion, first thing they need to do is to put a reset button on their planning. All the plans, I mean, almost every startup has an annual plan, quarterly plan, and all that stuff. Just shred it, throw it out of the window, or create a bonfire, and that's pretty much done and dusted. You need to start with a zero-based plan, because that's how big this crisis is. It is not incremental crisis. It is a complete reset of everything, every law and every rule that we know of in the past. Only the principles apply, but the state of the affairs of your market, your customers' behavior, all of that will go through change. And you don't want to do a delta based on January's behavior and see, where in 1 year from now will the behavior be the same. You want to do a complete reset. So I'll just give you an example of a travel industry. Travel industry has really got hit massively. And so far, travel industry has been competing on certain things like, availability, and then how the experience of the travel and price. These are the things that they typically compete on. Post-COVID, they will purely compete on contactless experience and how safe and secure am I, and not from whether the flights are safe, but am I safe with so many people around me. So the airport experience and the entire travel experience will have to go through a complete contactless. From the time you book your tickets to you will be printing your own boarding passes. You will, at the security, nobody will touch you. And then even frisking has to change. And, even the way you queue up to the security will have to change. And then when you get to the boarding gate, that experience will change. When you are sitting, that experience will change. Entire experience is completely would have changed. So the customer's expectation of travel experience is completely changed. That's one example I'm just giving you. But what does this mean is there is no playbook that if I'm a startup in playing in this travel space, there's no playbook for me to say, hey, this is what worked in the past, and therefore that's what work later. So similarly, I think what every startup should do, and in my opinion, even corporates need to do, is completely start with zero. What is your hypothesis? Write down 6 things that has permanently changed in your industry, and it's a hypothesis. We never know whether it will land the same way. But you need to make a bet. What is your bet on post-COVID world for you? Now, given that, what would your customers' behavior will look like? And given these 2, then what are your value proposition? Is it going to change? Then you have to tune yourself towards that new value proposition, which means there is a delta for what your product is doing right now and what your product should be doing in the post-COVID world. And you need to kind of start working on it while you are parallelly trying to survive. You are probably also trying to shift your position towards where you are aiming at post-COVID. This is very critical. If you don't do it,
take that, Bala, and you've touched a very pertinent point in terms of resetting the whole thing, doing a kind of a baseline, get a new set of hypotheses in the current scenario. Growth and scale have always been a quintessential kind of features for a startup. I mean, that's what I think everyone knows, that, okay, it's a whopping, it's a galloping kind of a pace. Now, suddenly there is a new element which has come in, the cash, the solvency part itself. Now, how do you see that? Because I know you've been into many of those situations through consulting, advisory with the startups. How do you see that situations where the entrepreneurs per se will say, okay, this third element cannot be ignored?
Yeah, and that comes into the how do I live through my current crisis angle of it. Cash is a huge component. Companies who already have enough cash, number one, I tell all of them, again, reset your burn rate expectation. You have to optimize completely, because you don't know when it'll end. You don't know whether it's a year, you don't know it's 1.5 years. And many different industries have different ways of bouncing back. Some industries will bounce back. Some industry actually has thrived during this crisis, like digital industries, like Zoom and WebEx. They are seeing fantastic surge in their demand. So some industries have that opportunity to do it, but whereas many of them you don't have a visibility of when it's going to end. So you need to conserve cash. So, and for people who have cash issues, I tell them typically, do whatever it takes tactically to operate yourself and keep yourself safe in terms of financially, which means you may have to take a tactical diversion from your goal, which means you have to look at everything, you know, throw everything in the kitchen sink and say, what can I do during this period? It could be consulting, it could be doing some projects, it could be doing anything else. If I were to give you an example, Airbnb, when they went through a very tough period, then they actually, you know, I think it's a very, very famous case study. They made breakfast cereals, right? So for Obama elections, they made cereal boxes and they sold it. And it's not Airbnb's job to make cereal boxes and sell it. And but they had to do that because during the time it was a crisis period for them. So this is a crisis period. It's not a normal period. We need to first recognize that. And while we have our ambition to win the world in whatever space we are in, right now you have to survive for yet another day. So what I would tell is, I would say, first thing, your biggest asset in a startup are the people. Look at the skill sets of every individual people. If you have to freelance them, go freelance them, right? Find a project, bring in some money, take on some, you know, app development work. That has nothing to do with your startup, but that lets you, you know, live for another day. Second thing I tell them is, if there are some startups who have an opportunity to reorient into the COVID. I know a startup which is into autonomous vehicles. And they were selling autonomous vehicle into manufacturing units earlier, but then COVID obviously hit it. So what they did was they repurposed it to you know, the COVID hospitals, and where, you know, it's now becoming contactless. So they actually made these autonomous vehicles into vehicles which can go, you know, deliver stuff to the COVID patients without some human being from going and doing it. It's a complete repurpose. It's the same technology, but oriented towards a very different industry. That's another, you know, valid approach that you have to take. Third one is, I don't think startups really think through, is that you know, knock on the door of corporates and see if corporates can lend, you know, give you a lending hand to create some partnership where corporates have the customer base and they have the staying power, whereas they need innovative solutions. Earlier, I think, you know, whatever dynamics there was, but right now corporates are also looking for how can they transform themselves through technology. They are getting, you know, they're struggling there. So if you were to create a corporate partnership, it could be acqui-hire, it could be a partnership, it could be exclusive deal that you can give them for some, you know, whatever deal that works. I don't think startups really are pushing that button, you know, kind of reaching out to corporates and selling an idea that let's do a partnership together. It will allow me to survive and it will allow you to innovate. So it's a complementary partnership that's very much possible.
So that's fascinating what you said, because I'm trying to kind of, one, you pretty well answered this whole aspect about what's the pivot, flip, and the change that they need to do. I like that analogy, what you said, but you know, one analogy I say that, look, alcohol is alcohol, whether used for scotch or for sanitizer, that's a different thing. But more importantly, yes, two things which very well resonated is, one is you said about this whole corporate tie-ups, the partnerships kind of a thing. And I would like to double down a bit on this, because that's a very crucial, I would say, factorial in terms of how startups and corporates can work together. But before that, one feature and dimension, Bala, I need to make you kind of, let's say, dwell upon is this client acquisition within the startup world. Now, often it was perceived, okay, do a quasi solution, an MVP, or a kind of a, let's say, a work in progress kind of a, let's say, product feature, and you'll be able to bag the deals. That's not going to happen anymore now, because corporates or clients have become more smarter. Of course, everyone have their own threshold in terms of what's real and what's something, I mean, in the making. The client acquisition strategy for startups, how do you see that evolving in the time to come?
There are two parts, absolutely, a very important, crucial question. There are two parts to it. One is in their normal course of how do they sell? That has gone very digital. Nobody is able to travel right now. Even if you travel, nobody wants to meet you in person. So, and for a long time, we're all going to be sitting in our houses like this, and then we have to continue to do business. So you got to figure out a way of completely dominating digital, or consuming digital ways in which you can get to the clients, right? So I think that's if somebody was overly relying on feet on the street earlier, and in-person discussions, which is, it works beautifully in certain ways. But now you got to do a lot of things. Like, for example, look at our industry. Like, you are a consulting person, so you have to meet clients, but now you're doing webinars, right? So it's very important for us to make that shift and understand, and digital is the only way for a long time where you will have to look at lead generation and stuff like that. So if a startup is has to figure out really how to optimize that and do well. That's one. Number two, you got to really entice a corporate to kind of make it sweet for them to adopt you or adopt your solution. So there is a lot of co-creation possibilities here, and for that you need to be a thought leader. Now, if you go and tell, hey, I'm at another solution, corporates that's one conversation you need to have with the corporates. But the same way you knew your new normal is going to be different. Every corporate is also facing the same situation. They are facing disruption in so many industries. You take real estate, you take healthcare, you take education, you take logistics, you take retail, travel, hospitality, agriculture, governance. If you take across the board, all the corporates are facing that, in another year or two, they have fundamentally altered the entire dynamics of the industry. So why don't you go and actually give them that view, right? And tell them, because you have to be prepared, and we are a better partner for you to prepare. And this is how you can brace yourself for disruption, or rather, we will become your competitive advantage for your disruption. And disruption is coming. So if you were to have that narrative with the corporates, I think it's a fantastic narrative at this point of time, because all of them are struggling with how is that thing going to look like? Where will my business will land, and how will I navigate through it? Their entire existing machinery will be good for status quo, but that status quo is changing, and so for them to make that leap, it's very hard, because they have scale, and at scale they have to make the leap. It's going to take many years, but a startup can make that leap for them very quickly in a quarter. But that's the conversation startups have to go and have with the corporates. Not saying, I'm going to just help you run faster, or I'm going to automate something what you already doing it. That's more incremental. I think at this point of time, startup needs to have more disruption kind of conversation with the corporates. I think those conversations will fly much better, and it'll really create stronger partnership with corporates.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think that the point, some of these, what you mentioned, really, one is really very, very succinct in terms of what they should be doing. And second, I think there is one of the lever what they can actually put their energy towards is something, knock on the doors of the corporates. But that's a question which even Bala, which was running in my mind when you were talking about this thing. Let's switch to the corporate side. And we have some the senior folks from the corporates from, I would say, global companies as well in the session. What's been the stumbling block from the corporate side? Is there an inertia? Is there a kind of a, let's say, a kind of we are different kind of a, let's say, challenge? Because seemingly it's all a question of capabilities, which either you can kind of build in-house, or you can just acquire, or kind of, let's say, take an expertise of a startup. So from a lens of the corporates, what's the right partnership you believe should be done from a startup level? And this is where I'm putting in the lens of a corporate, and would love to hear your views, please.
Right. No, absolutely, Samir. I think corporates are, in fact, I tell, when I speak to corporates, I tell them that the most smartest people in the ecosystem are in large companies, not in startups. In fact, even though I spend a lot of time in startups, I think smartest people are in large companies. But still,
that's a big revelation, Bala. Your rating will go phenomenally by a lot of these large corporates.
No, I tell them, because I believe that. Because the canvas is bigger, the scale is bigger. So you really need some smart people to be able to really grow. I mean, I have deep respect for any company which makes money year after year, quarter after year, and keep growing. So it really takes magic to do that. So they do have to recognize that magic, except that the scale poses certain problems. If you have to deal with any decision will impacting thousands of people and you have to communicate in a way, there is a lag in the communication. There is a culture that gets set, and if you want to turn the culture, it's not like in the morning you can do one thing and in the evening you can do another thing. So the nimbleness and agility is what they compromise for the scale. And I tell corporates, please don't act like startups, because you guys will break all the things that are actually working for you. You cannot be a startup. You are a big ship, and it takes a long time to turn the ship. When you turn the ship, the displacement the ship can do is massive compared to a tiny little boat, correct? But boats, strength is it can move fast. So don't compete with the boat on the speed, but compete on the displacement that you can carry, right? So this is two different strengths and two different ways they operate. So given that, obviously,
sorry to chime in, Bala. This is a very great analogy what you said. Can you just come back and say that again, please, on this?
Yeah, so I look at the a corporate as a fleet of big ships, right? And it takes like hundreds of people to turn it. Even for them to turn, they have to really plan, and then they have to turn. But when they turn, they will carry a lot of displacement that they can carry. Whereas the ship can turn any which way, every second, but it cannot carry displacement. It doesn't have the scale. But ship can move very fast, very quickly. It can be here today, it can be there tomorrow. Ship cannot, but a big fleet of ship cannot. But the boat can. Small boats can easily move around. So the strength of a large ship is the scale and the displacement it can carry. Right? It's like, think of it as a cruise ship. Thousands of people with like swimming pools and all that. To change that, you are displacing so much. Versus a small ship of 10 people, it can carry. It cannot carry 1,000 people, for example. So a large company needs to recognize their home advantage, which is the scale, and actually complementarily look at startup not as a competition, but as a partner, because the startup can compensate for what a large ship cannot do. A startup can move fast. You need the ability to move fast, but you don't think that you can move fast, right? So you are, after all, a cruise ship. So you will not move fast no matter how much you apply, correct? So it takes a very different skill for managing a cruise ship, and it takes a very different skill for managing a small little boat which can move very quickly. So the combination of partnership is a combination. And the overall, so far, what has happened, Samir, is that there has been a trust deficit between these two parties. And the trust deficit is because by they think differently. When you ask a startup, the startup can quickly move, but when you are looking at a large ship, they need to plan and do things slowly. And then the another thing which has happened is that, let's say 5 years back, companies felt like their markets were stable. That means, they know what's coming at them. They have few quarters to respond first of all, few quarters to recognize a competition, then few quarters to plan, and few quarters to respond. They need a 1 to 1.5 year cycle of planning. But off late, what's happening is that cycle is shrinking. Things are like moving way too quickly. Within 6 months, your industry is completely changing. It's happening for two reasons. One is, overall, we've all started using digital technologies. Like we are using everything on the cloud and on phones and all that. And digital technologies move very quickly, generation to generation, as compared to a physical product. So that itself has created a rapid cycle of change in customers' behavior. It's become much more shorter. And the second thing is, digital companies have come, which are your digital behemoths like your Amazon, your Microsoft, your Google, your Apples of the world. These guys are coming into every industry. They are coming into healthcare. They're coming into education. They're coming into automotive. They're coming into logistics, retail. You name an industry, they are just coming in and eating away the industry because of the digital spread of the industry. So this is creating a huge competition. Frankly, a large company's competition is not another large company in the same industry. It is one of these tech behemoths. They are the ones who will come and eat your lunch. Startups can only nibble at your lunch. They will not be eating at your lunch. They are creating point solutions. So you have only two options. Option number one is become like Facebook and Amazons and Apples, which is I don't think it's a it's a fair option at all, right? The second option is do something to create a moat around you, a digital moat, and the digital moat should be made of portfolio of startups, and these startups are the ones which will help you move a little faster around you, so that you create your competitive wall, which can help you fend these this competition from coming, right? So I look at corporate and startup partnership as very critical, and it has become even more critical now given all the COVID and everything else, for their not just future, but for their survival today, because we are witnessing an alteration in the industry behavior, and this is going to be very, very interesting. And now COVID is not a COVID. If people think that COVID is a healthcare crisis, that's wrong. COVID has a domino effect. COVID has created economic crisis, right? Because of the the whole spread of the virus, we're all sitting at home. Economy got busted. Now, economy getting busted created a lot of stress, and now it has created geopolitical crisis, right? Now you saw what happened just a couple of days ago about India banning 59 apps. Whoever thought that there will be a disruption from that angle, from geopolitical crisis which got started. So COVID is kind of going to have this domino effect, and you will see tremendous amount of ups and downs of fortunes of various companies because of that. Somebody lost, but somebody won, right? It creates an opportunity. So in my opinion, we should start looking at COVID no longer as a crisis, but as an opportunity to disrupt ourselves and reset ourselves. And I think it is an opportunity for another reason as well. COVID has been a massive beneficial force for opening up some regulatory bottlenecks. If I go to take one example, in agriculture, in India, there has been for 50 years, we had a rule where the villagers, the farmers cannot directly sell to the end customers. They have to go through a intermediary called APMC, right? So this actually was a bizarre rule, but it was there for some time, but there was never a political will to change it. And there was some incumbent, forces which were trying to keep it down, but COVID opened it up. Overnight, suddenly that thing got opened up, and now farmers can directly go and sell to end customers, which means now you will start seeing more startups in agri-tech, which is trying to enable that, right? So the second thing which will happen is contract farming. More and more FMCG companies will directly have to work with farmers, and they would love to work with farmers in the contract farming kind of a model, which means you will need more technology in terms of managing all of that. So it has created opportunity in many spaces where the regulatory thing was bottleneck. The other example is the healthcare, right? So the whole online consultation that was there for many, many years, almost for a decade. You could have just done remote consultation using video, but no, they didn't allow it. But come COVID, everybody's saying, don't even come to hospital, video consultation is fine, Maybe we need such a crisis to actually open up new spaces. I think corporates have to look at those spaces. Like, for example, if hospitals, for them to build a, platform around that, on the digital platform, overnight is not going to be possible. So partnership with startup will give them that edge that they can really solve for, problems today using technology.
Brilliant. I think the metaphors what you used, Bala, I like this whole ship versus boat thing and the digital moat creation kind of thing. Also, three sectors what you clearly are: agriculture, the contract manufacturing, and the healthcare, specifically the telemedicine or other, the tele kind of consulting side. And I think most of us could identify that this crisis is more like an opportunity. It's just sitting. We got to just take a notice and kind of pivot and repivot in terms of what works best in terms of, I would say, monetization. Great. Switching gears, I think, and this was something which, came as a kind of a pre-session question. And you've worked with Microsoft Ventures, you worked with Techstars also. Let's go to the brass tacks when it comes to nurturing startups. Help us explain this differential between incubators, accelerators, and also in the context, some of the corporates have created their own in-house accelerators or incubators, and even GCC as well. So take us through in terms of what's the difference and how startups can be nurtured or can be enhanced over there.
Got it. I think incubators are easy to, let's get the incubator out of the way and then we'll talk about accelerators. Incubators are when you start working at 0 to 1 kind of phase, like idea, and some of the spaces need a lot more tinkering before even you have a product out there. So, for example, healthcare, hardware, and some research modeling and biotech. You will find more incubators in that space, hardware, biotech, healthcare area, because they need to tinker a lot before even they know whether a product will work or not. Mostly in software platforms and kind of stuff, you don't find too many incubators because they can build out some prototype very quickly. It doesn't really require. So there in the software space, what is critical is the product market fit. Once you have a product, you have a proposition to the market. And are people buying? Who are buying? Why are they buying? How much? Are they buying with the same interest that you are expecting? So that questions is what is called as a product market fit, and accelerators are a good vehicle for helping the startups to not reinvent the wheel. Primarily, the first generation of accelerators was many seasoned entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs who came together and said, look, we made all the mistakes. I don't know the recipe for success, but I know the recipe for failure, right? So what if we help the startups in removing that recipe for failure in the ways in which you can fail and avoid it, and so that they can, their chances of success is much higher. Nobody knows what will make a startup successful, but everybody knows of the 10 ways startups can fail. So accelerators were there to kind of share that best practices and increase the odds of winning, as well as help them with some market connects and help them with investor connects and accelerate the journey kind of a thing. Most accelerators are focused on what I call as the product market fit stage. I have a product, maybe I hustled and I got 2-3 customers, but I now need to generically go to the market and figure out if this product will work. So that's the product market fit kind of thing. There are some accelerators which are into help them scale stage also, which are, I would say, Microsoft is one such, where Microsoft is not as interested in helping the startups in finding the fit, but they are interested in opening doors to the customer base. Amazon also has a similar one. Any company which sells to a lot of customers in a particular industry or across industry, and they have a platform to sell, they will want startups to be on the platform so that the platform looks rich and innovative. And that was another set of accelerators which is there. And then there are some special purpose accelerators like academic accelerator, social, social and impact area accelerator. There is one accelerator which I am associated with, which is called assistive technology accelerator, which is primarily for helping people with some kind of a handicap. So there are different special purpose accelerator as well. I encourage as many accelerators to kind of come. You don't have to really have a structured program. It's up to you. Some people like the structure. Some people are okay to do it in a very fluid manner. You can pick and choose the format in which you want to work with startups. I really want corporates to have from day one, or even if not, definitely have some level of relationship with the startup. I'll tell you, the biggest beneficiary or the first degree benefit that a corporate gets is an infusion of energy and infusion of a shock that, oh my God, I can do, they can do so much in such a short time. We need to challenge ourselves. So it changes their culture to begin with. The first thing that happens is the change of culture by just bringing some corporate leaders and tech leaders and have them have conversation with the startup itself. But it should not stop there. And the second one is to start working with the startup, which will break a few eggs around around the corporates, because it's hard for them to trust someone outside. What happens to my IP? Who will do this and all that stuff? My recommendation there is be generous. Be generous. If only one person can get benefit out of the relationship, let it be the startup. This is the mindset the corporate needs. Corporates can, they can carry on, right? So they don't have to pit themselves against a startup there. So if you're getting some money as a partnership, be generous and give it to startup, because then 10 more startups want to work with you, right? So then that's how you are creating a community and a platform and a trust with you, and that opens up new value, new kinds of value that you can create. And this is where I see I want the leadership to be more open to that. Like, and it has to come from leader, because every time I work with a lot of startups, and when they go bottom up, the conversations get stuck because it creates insecurity within the corporate. Let's say you're talking to a business development manager or a development manager there, and say, hey, do you want to work with us? And the development manager gets threatened, right? Because he's like, oh my God, what if these guys come? What happens to my team? This kind of things will happen. So it gets blocked. So it has to come from top down. But startups don't necessarily get that level of attention from the top. And this needs to be there. And large companies, corporates also have to create a safe zone for their own employees. They have to grow the pie, not think that the pie is fixed, right? Because then you will see this type of a not invented here type of issues which come up within their team. They will find 10 ways why a particular idea will not work if they think that the pie is fixed. But if they think that the pie is growing, then they will figure out 10 ways why it will work. And both scenarios are correct, right? So I would like the startups to focus primarily on creating a growth mindset, growth culture, remove this not invented here, syndrome, and create a safe culture for their own employees initially before even you start working with startups. Then you bring in startups, and then you create a windfall for both. I'll give you one example, and I'll stop after that. Is that PLG, Lafley, right? He written a book around it. Very old case study. He had his own R&D division of PhDs and everybody else whose job is to come up with new products, new molecules, new innovations. And then he felt like maybe I'm sandbagging them. And so he made a KPI change for his own research people. He said, you can come and give me all your whatever you are producing, but I want 25% of your ideas to come from outside. He made it a KPI of his own research team, that you need to give me 25% of your ideas should come from outside. Suddenly, what that happened, Samir, is that these guys until then they would not even look outside. But now they have to create 25% has to be sourced from outside, which means they started scouting for other labs and other inventions which are happening outside, and that completely transformed the way they themselves thought about it. I think this is very important to be driven from top down. Otherwise, the change is very hard incrementally doing.
No, I think within that entire narrative, Bala, you kind of almost gave a very pragmatic set of, I would say, insights to the corporates, because the reason I'm trying to kind of think upon this thing, because it's got a linearity with your earlier narrative. What you alluded to is, look, at some level, there are technology behemoths, and corporates may figure out to kind of say, okay, startup is not their cup of tea at this stage, but you never know what these technology behemoths may do. And maybe the corporates will become absolutely dolphins, and I would say small kind of let's say, fish in the entire pond when these technology behemoths take those kind of a larger, I would say, ponds in terms of acquiring companies and even startups. So I think it's got a very, I would say, great set of, I would call, insights for really to have these corporates really think about how their innovation, how their next level of even growth and scale will come in, and startups could be one of the answers. That's good. So I think we've covered a lot, and I want to infuse one question, because there are seemingly a set of a few questions around the digital aspect, and I'm just trying to blend and ask you, and I'll move to a very different kind of a perspective after this. This whole aspect around digital transformation. I mean, this whole wave caught up where a lot of startups came into the picture, tom-tomming about digital transformation. And suddenly then this whole aspect of digital maturity came in, where some of the startups said, look, we can help you build those kind of capabilities, maturity models, or truncate that entire cycle. Suddenly, it seems to be kind of it looks that it's not what it seemingly was, digital transformation. There's a lot under the hood. And that's where startups started getting into solving one problem each and taking it deep, what we call the inch wide, mile deep strategy. In your opinion, while you've interfaced with a lot of startups, how do they see this digital transformation? And in your view, also, Bala, what's digital transformation in the startup parlance?
Right. So I think you're absolutely right, Samir. Startups have to focus on inch wide, mile deep. Otherwise, they'll be at higher risk. It's very counterintuitive. Everybody says, spread yourself and you'll spread your risk, but actually if you spread yourself, you're increasing your risk. So focusing on one tiny thing but really go deep is a much better position for a startup to take. Startups are typically digital native companies because they're born in the post-digital world. So they only think digital. I mean, frankly, startups don't think pre-digital at all. So for them to think of digital as a transformation is in my opinion, is hard because they think that they figure in the transformed area. But one big thing that I noticed in the past 5 years is that the value creation has moved away from automating or bringing technology for your operations to almost giving away the operation side of it, transaction side of it free. That's actually, there's no more kind of automating your transaction part of your operation part of your business. It doesn't really help anybody. It is moved to the next area, which is assuming that it's already automated and it's digital. You've brought in every data into your digital side. What value can you create out of it, which is more on what you guys do, which is primarily artificial intelligence, machine learning. What can it teach me about my segment, my customer, their preferences, and the new products? How are they using my products? And these type of deeper questions that people never had even ask those questions, forget about answering those questions, are the ones that startups are focusing on. And in my opinion, this is again a reset moment almost. It is where you think that if you ask me who's my customer, I would have a fixed way of describing my customer, right, in the olden world. But I think that's becoming more fluid. Like the way I'm just going to use a very jokey, as a joke, I'm going to use an analogy which is very different. In the olden days, like your gender was very clear. You were male or a female. But today there are 7 variations of gender, and somebody can say I'm gender neutral. They can say I'm gender fluid, and your customer segmentation has become like that. Correct? So right. So right. You have to move away from this static view of my customers are this, their beliefs are this, their behaviors are this, they live here. It's very fluid. And what this allows you to do is that you will discover, every day you're waking up as a business owner and saying, I'm going to discover something more about my customer because my customer behavior is shifting. I need to shift with the customer. Or maybe you also have an opportunity to guide the customer through certain behavior, which is meaningful to you. So this is where the game is. This is where the dollars are being made. This is where you have to control. Whoever controls this will be the winner in the new era. And I'm actually preaching to the teacher here. You actually help companies navigate through this particular thought process. In my opinion, from a digital maturity perspective, the stage 0 is making your company digital, right? So that's stage 0, which means no aspect of your data lies in a non-digital format. If you still are struggling with that, you still have bunches of loads of data which is non-digital, that's like, you're not even in the digital transformation anymore. You're missing it. So stage 0 or the first stage is everything coming in. The second stage is having a strategy around what goes where and stuff like that. And the third stage is around mining the data for value. And the fourth stage, in my opinion, is doing it in a way with fantastic governance, both internal as well as with your customers. Like your customer you should respect that the customer needs to govern the data that you have around them. We will move towards that world where the customer privacy and the data governance part of it will become very critical, and it will become a competitive advantage for a company which has figured out. Otherwise, you'll be shut down, right? The penalties will be very high. So you have to figure out how you can be a good custodian of your customers' data and a trustworthy custodian of your customer data. Second, make it very complex for you to channel the value or insights to your own employees, because each of them will look at it from different lenses. And that's a multi-headed hydra. And if you can really figure out, that's a nirvana of, in my opinion, how you can actually do that, right? So we can actually talk about an hour just in this space, but I'm going to stop here.
No, I think it's quite a good thing what you said. And switching quickly, Bala, and sorry, we've got a drummer in the neighborhood, and every weekend he plays at this point of time. So if you happen to have some beats, and got to give him funding actually, so that he can get a studio for himself rather than playing.
That's a good way of thinking, raising money from you. I will come next to your house and try.
No, because you said in the part of the narrative, AI advisors have become the persons who actually do webinar sessions. So that's what we are doing now. But coming back, I think, and this is something which I want to put forward for our global audience. This whole ecosystem of startups, we found Israel becoming a hotspot for cool startups on the technology side, Estonia becoming full of blockchain and fintech, and India, of course, has a melange of startups and all. How do you see, and there are again other geographies who are taking their own pole positions on creating that startup ecosystem. So in the time to come, and specifically interspreading with COVID situation, how do you think the global startup ecosystem will behave and will emerge? And one kind of a, let's say, line of thought I'm trying to put is also in equation would be these technology behemoths, what you talked about. So paint us some brush around this, Bala.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, I think it's going to be a fantastic opportunity, provided startups figure out a way of surviving through this big phase of crisis. Once you come out of it, I do expect many startups to shut down. It's not easy. This crisis is not easy at all. Cash is oxygen, and if you kind of choke on that, many startups will not be able to get through that. But what this means is the survival of the fittest type of situation. So once you kind of are able to survive, I think it is going to be a reasonably good ride. The second is if you are able to tell a post-COVID new normal story and position yourself there, then you actually can raise money even today, right? So if you look at the venture funding, what's happening is most of the venture funding, new conversations have kind of slowed down significantly because the venture funds are trying to conserve money for the startups that they've already invested in, and they want to support them, which is the right thing for them to do. But we also want the more startups to get funded. And what's happening is if you've already been in advanced stages of with the VC, then that's continuing, and I've seen deals closing. But if you really want to start a new conversation, you have to really excite a VC saying the post-COVID scenario is going to be like this, and I fit in beautifully in that. So I'm very strategic from that angle. That would create a lot of interest from VC. So it again goes back to our the very first question that we discussed is they need to really have a hypothesis on what the post-COVID looks like, and they need to create their product line, and they have to reorient it to that value proposition. If you do that, you not only are safer in the post-COVID scenario, you can actually use that story with a corporate, you can use that story with a VC, and you can actually raise money as well. So in my opinion, startup ecosystem, I'm bullish about it, and corporates will learn to work with startups. There is just no alternative for a non-digital company, I would call an incumbent company, to convert into digital. You know how it is. It's becoming digital is not an easy job at all. A lot of people say, I can hire a team of people and do it. That's not how it works. It's not about team of people. It's about how you think even digitally, right? So it's hard for a corporate to kind of shed their skin and put on a new skin. It's not impossible, but it'll take a long time, and you don't have the time. Hence, startups, and the startups partnership with startups is a key strategy and a key competitive play that corporates have to do. And I think they should start with that, and maybe acquire some of the startups, and then absorb that DNA into yourself. So this is the way I think the global ecosystem is going to go. The tech behemoths will also do a lot of acquisition because they know. And for tech behemoth, the way startups should present themselves is to surround strategy. Like they should see where they're expanding their canvas, and if you're already there in their line of expansion, it's easy for them to acquire the startup and get there faster than compared to do it. Never compete with a tech behemoths, one of the big companies, head on, because while you are innovative as a startup, they have all the money and the and the access and everything else. Never take it head on. You have to play in a more surround strategy there, and work with non-digital companies, and you have a better play there as well in terms of partnership. So this is how I see the ecosystem shifting.
Perfect. And Bala, this one I saw it coming, a question which it's always what you say, that at some level you got to put a leader into a spot. And we've got 3 minutes to kind of, let's say, close our conversation and discussion. What's an ideal secret sauce or a recipe for a startup pitch? You've kind of seen, heard, and thrashed and accepted a lot of these pitches.
Right.
What's the thing which goes in the mind of an investor?
Got it.
When they look at funding or not funding a startup?
Sure.
This is Bala Girisaballa's view. Please go ahead.
Right.
Give us some nuggets.
No, absolutely. And I'm very opinionated about it. And many of the startups who have who I've mentored, they will resonate with what I'm going to say. For an early stage startup, particularly below Series A, because after Series A, what happens is your momentum and you have a track record. You can open up your P&L and balance sheet, and that's what should guide you in terms of the next round of funding. But until about Series A, you need something more. You don't have enough track record that the investor can bet on. They will look for other signals. The number one signal, there are 2 signals I will talk about, and I'll stop there. Number 1 signal is, what problem are you addressing? If you cannot sell the problem, right, you cannot sell a solution around the problem. It'll just fall like a pack of cards. So the problem has to be really, that's the hook. And if they feel like, yes, this is a problem, because VCs look at the problem as opportunity, right? So you cannot tell that there's a big market if you cannot really sell that problem at all. So you have to sell the problem, which is a big problem. Second is, why you? These are the only 2 things I would talk about. And the reason why you is important is, of course, if it is a problem, the problem is generic to the world. So it's not something that you are discovering the problem. You just figured out that this is a problem, but you have to stand up and say, I am most suitable to solve this problem because ... Right? So I have this insight about it. I have spent 3 years, facing this particular problem. I have built this ecosystem around me, or I have an IP, any of that, right? So you should be able to convince people that this is a worthwhile problem and why you are the worthwhile person that you should bet on. If this too happens, Samir, I have seen, even if you had a crappy projection, your VC will come and coach you, say, no, the project, we should change this projection. If you have even a crappy product, your VC will coach you and will say, I'll give you money, go build a better product. But if these 2 fundamental things are missing or shaky, they will not bet on you at all.
Bala, we would have loved to carry on, but I've got a kind of a teaser for our next session. And I will take you for that, which is, how do you identify the art of problems for a startups kind of a thing? But must say, brilliant turbocharged session, engrossing, engaging, and absolutely riveting. Not only because of the various perspectives, you covered the whole spectrum, but also the whole anecdotal pieces in terms of what you've seen, what you've interfaced, what you've experienced, went into your narrative, and also in terms of how you very, very nicely built up this ecosystem of linking startups with corporates, with technology behemoths, and how this entire ecosystem and landscape will evolve in the time to come. And no better than you in terms of even saying that, look, treat this particular time and period as an opportunity more than a crisis. Thank you so much for your time. Really engaging and absolutely absorbing. I learned a lot in this session as well. And thank you so much, all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Samir. It was always fun chatting with you.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you. Thanks, Bala. Thanks, everyone.